Welcome to the Fabulous 413. I'm Khalees Smith.
And I'm Monty Belmonte. Today, for the first time, this show will travel outside of the 413 area code.
Not counting the segment we did in Orange, which is technically not in the 413, but still in the 4 counties of Western Mass. There are 4 towns that have 978s.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
But today, we'll explore in the 860 area code and in the 965 country code.
I don't know how you found that.
I just Googled it.
Okay. Well,
And yet, still, we maintain our fabulous 413 bona fides.
because there's connections there. Later in the show, we'll talk with Kuwaiti author Bethaina Alesa, whose new book, published by Restless Books in Amherst, is called The Book Censor's Library and is a fascinating tale about censorship that transcends national boundaries.
But first, to the 860.
It isn't an actual garden, right?
No, it is.
Okay,
there
great.
are a lot of gardens.
We have on our site, we have gardens. We have a community garden where we grow food and actually put it out to the community. That will kind of start this spring into summer, so it's not quite ready yet. But the
You have to
idea,
ask us sometimes it's figurative, and they're
No.
like, well,
Yeah.
come to our, like,
we have.
The garden of your mind.
yeah,
No,
our thought
I mean,
garden.
it's-
And it's like, that's real
It's
cool.
all of that. It's the thought
is.
garden. It's intellectual.
We
it's
grow
a physical.
in all ways.
There we
grow in
go.
all ways.
Did you ever grow anything in the garden of your mind?
This weekend, the Harriet Beecher Stowe Center presents a community event, Garden of Literacy. The event will feature games, giveaways, workshops, a newly designed tour, and more on the grounds of the writer and abolitionist home just outside the 413 in Hartford, Connecticut. This is kind of a big deal.
I know this is our first time talking about stuff outside of our designated area.
But we've been on for more than a year, so we can expand the boundaries ever so slightly.
Every
of the
once in
fabulous
a
413.
while,
Yes.
we'll make exceptions, especially when the folks who designed this program pretty much all live in the 413. So
Or
we've
have
got
until
connections
late. Yes.
right here. So with us to talk about the event and the center itself are Executive Director Karen Fisk, Director of Collections and Public Programs Kat White, and newly appointed Director of Interpretation and Visitor Experience Erica Slocum, friend of the show.
Friend of the show.
Still PhD candidate? Did you defend?
Not yet, no.
Okay.
And
you got this.
People may
Yeah,
remember you from when you came on to talk about is it Liberty Heights is the name of it?
Liberty Park.
Liberty Park in Holyoke, an overlooked neighborhood of history that you're trying to bring back to light, which I think is amazing. But Harriet Beecher Stowe is a famous name, but let's make sure everybody feels included. If people don't remember who Harriet Beecher Stowe is or why that may resonate with them from when they were in school.
Or, if your state struck her book from your curriculum.
Yeah, who was Harriet Beecher Stowe? Let's go with the executive director of the Harriet Beecher Stowe Center, Karen Fisk.
Thank you. Harriet Beecher Stowe was a writer who, in the 19th century, decided to use her voice to make change. She understood that slavery was wrong. She wanted to do something about it. She was a woman, so she didn't have much power. She was a white woman, so she had some power. And she decided the best way to make sure people understood that the people who were being enslaved were people with deep feelings and deep stories was to write a story about them. And so she wrote Uncle Tom's Cabin. It ended up being a bestseller in the U.S. and then also throughout the world. It was the first international bestseller of the first and only international bestseller of the 19th century, remembering this was a woman who wrote this book. And she did impact people's thoughts. She changed their minds, and she enacted what we like to call literary activism, which is where you write something, draw something, dance something, sing something, say something that helps people change their hearts and minds.
That's been an ongoing theme of the show, where the arts opening up people's minds to new ideas is an important thing. And it's interesting that this historical place, the Stowe Center, is doing the same thing. What are some of the things we could experience at the Stowe Center? The newly appointed Director of Visitor Experience, Erica Slocum.
So I think right now, one of the stories that we're focusing in on is looking at the constellation of people who influenced Harriet. Those are largely enslaved or formerly enslaved folks who wrote their own narratives, right, and said, here's what my experience was like, here's how I escaped to freedom, and here's what I'm continuing to do, right? And so we have people like Frederick Douglass and Harriet Jacobs, as well as Josiah Henson and John Andrew Jackson, right, who took their story and then continued to be freedom builders, even when they had themselves attained their own freedom. With our new interpretation or the starting of a new interpretation of not only the space, but also of the history, we started to include those narratives, right? And really using Harriet Beecher Stowe and the work that she did with writing her book of really reframing the history around these are the people who she read, their narratives, and was really impacted by their stories and said, look, I have to do this thing. And so kind of did a collaboration of different experiences and brought up these characters that she thought, in the way that she thought, would really touch white Christian 19th century folks.
We're speaking with Erica Slocum and Karen Fisk and Kat White from the Harriet Beecher Stowe Center, a rock's throw away from the border of the 413 in Hartford, Connecticut, who this weekend are going to be hosting the Garden of Literacy project, games, activities, crafts, and more, noon to 7 at the Stowe Center.
This is the start of a ongoing spring-summer community series. Kat, can you talk a little bit more about getting the greater community involved in the things that Harriet Beecher Stowe Center does and why it's important to bring more people into the ongoing story and legacy there?
Yeah, absolutely. So this is, as you say, going to be kicking off a regular series of really multi-generational, family-friendly programming that'll be happening every third Saturday of the month through August. And this is just a new way that we're trying to connect with the community that we're in, our immediate neighbors, and bring the work that we attempt to do, literary activism, social justice, understanding true histories, to a younger audience as well. So many books out there, especially, are just keyed in on these topics that are made for younger folks to help process what's going on in the world, what has happened in history, and maybe ways that they aren't learning in school, learning perspectives and cultures, just introducing them to topics in a way that is comfortable for a younger level. And so that's really exciting. So every third Saturday, we're going to have an hour where we have an activity and then a reading circle as well. And that'll be followed by the intergenerational tour, which Erica can speak more of. But this month, we're going to be reading one of Springfield's favorites, actually. We're going to be reading The Lorax.
Nice.
Perfect
for Earth Day.
Exactly.
That's by Dr. Seuss, if you didn't know.
It is by Dr. Seuss, yes.
Shouldn't assume that everybody knows the Lorax, but yeah.
We've made references to the Lorax with other guests, like you're the Lorax of X.
Yes, exactly.
Yes.
And so this is also going to be part of a larger community day that'll be happening 3 times at least throughout the year. And these are just days where we open up our grounds and really try and welcome everyone and make our place a place that feels welcoming and accessible to everyone.
Kat White, who is the Director of Collections and Public Programs at the Harriet Beecher Stowe Center, what exactly for this Garden of Literacy thing this Saturday would people experience?
It is nature and nurture.
Uh-huh.
One of our, actually, interpreters, versatile poetic, she is also a spoken word artist, an educator, a poet, and just a really dynamic human being. So she's going to be leading a poetry workshop, and this is going to be focused around themes of nature, thinking about how nature nurtures us and what role nature can have in our own lives, what role it might have in social justice as well. So she's going to be working with folks. If you are a poet already, that's fantastic. How to grow your skills, maybe try new things. If you are just curious about a poet, if you're not a poet like me, maybe a way to get started thinking about poetry and expressing yourself in this way. We're also going to be having another workshop that same day that is led by Brenna, and they are also one of our interpreters. A very skilled writer, award-winning writer, and that will be about speculative fiction and social justice.
This is the one I'm most curious about because I'm a genre fiction girl.
Nice.
And, social justice has always kind of been at the core of that particular area of genre fiction. Why bring it into this? And is that workshop geared towards adults, or is it open to all ages?
This is what's amazing about our interpreters is they really can scale to everyone. So if you're a young writer, if you're an emerging writer, you're absolutely welcome, and this is going to be perfect for you. If you're an adult and you have a lot of skills writing and a lot of experience writing, this is also going to be great for you. So they are extremely talented at meeting people where they're at.
It ties in really nicely with the Harriet Beecher Stowe because Uncle Tom's Cabin is, while based on true stories, was not a first-hand account. It was fiction. How does Uncle Tom's Cabin hold up in 2024? I don't remember reading it since I was in probably middle school, and I hope I have progressed a great deal since what I thought back then to where I am now. And hopefully we as a nation have progressed since it was originally written by Harriet Beecher Stowe. And I see some folks in there.
That's the gesture I was
Yes, in some ways, yes, and in some ways, definitely no, I'm sure. But how does the book itself stand up in 2024? Karen Fisk, Executive Director of the Harriet Beecher Stowe Center in Hartford.
So 2 years ago, our Stowe Prize for Literary Activism winner was Dr. Clint Smith for the book How the Word is Passed. And when he first came to the Stowe Center, he took a tour of the Stowe House. And in that tour, he learned about a man named Josiah Henson. Josiah Henson was enslaved in Maryland, and after living a very full life where he thought things would go the way they should go, tried to buy his own freedom from his enslaver, and was treated out of his money, realized that this is not a system that's going to work for me, left with his family. He ran for freedom. He made his way up to Canada, where he started a settlement with some other people who had been enslaved, a settlement where they started a school, industry, and he didn't settle then. He went back and he rescued 118 other people, brought them north as well. He wrote his narrative in order to raise enough money to buy the freedom of his brother. And his book sold pretty well, but not as well as Uncle Tom's Cabin.
Mm-hmm.
Uncle Tom's Cabin, as we all know, became an international bestseller. It was very appealing to the audience that it was written for. Stowe and Henson met each other after Uncle Tom's Cabin had been written, but Stowe had read Josiah Henson's account. And we have a letter where Stowe mentions that Henson was one of the characters, one of the humans who influenced the character of Tom. And she said, but this gentleman is above and beyond Tom. This is a remarkable human being. So Clint Smith came to visit us and later wrote an article for the Atlantic magazine. It just came out last fall about Josiah Henson. In this, he said that reading Uncle Tom's Cabin was something he hadn't done for a while. He went back and he reread it. And he said, the character of Uncle Tom is far more noble, far more human, far more good than what he had remembered. And he said that everybody, to best understand the 19th century, should read Josiah Henson's narrative together with Uncle Tom's Cabin. Mm. So has it stood up? But together with this original narrative by Josiah Henson and by Harriet Jacobs and by John Andrew Jackson.
Who was from Springfield.
Tying
it back into the 413.
And Frederick Douglass and the many, many narratives that were written by formerly enslaved people. This is the way to read Uncle Tom's Cabin.
Coming up, we'll hear about the new intergenerational tours they're offering at the Harriet Beecher Stowe Center in Hartford and how literary activism leads to civic engagement.
And speaking of literary activism, later in the show we'll hear about the novel The Book Censor's Library by best-selling Kuwaiti author Buthaina Alesa, but it was published by a house here in the 413.
You're listening to the Fabulous 413 on 88.5 NEPM. Welcome back to the Fabulous 413. More from the 860 and the Harriet Beecher Stowe Center, where this Saturday in Hartford they will host their Garden of Literacy event.
We're speaking with Executive Director Karen Fisk, the Director of Collections and Public Programs, Kat White, and the Director of Interpretation and Visitor Experience, Erica Slocum, who's particularly excited about the center's intergenerational tours.
Our intergenerational tour, which we're debuting this Saturday, is called Inheriting Freedom. The idea of having an intergenerational tour is that we realized in creating our new tour for K-12 students, which is called Freedom and Agency, and really looking at this idea of freedom builders who are not only working to attain their freedom, but they're doing it. As Karen said, Josiah isn't just looking for freedom for himself. He's also, looking to free his children and other folks who are left behind when he self-emancipates. And when you look at Frederick Douglass and Harriet Jacobs, that's true for them as well, right? Like no one person says, okay, I'm free, that's the end of it. They are thinking about the children who are still enslaved, and also they're thinking about those future generations that are coming behind them. This idea of literacy and education as building freedom, as well as looking to civic engagement, right? And so all of these individuals are not only self-emancipating, they're writing their own narratives, both learning to read and write while they're enslaved and after they attain their freedom, and also building schools, right? So both Harriet Jacobs and Frederick Douglass in particular look to this education not just as like, okay, we have to learn to read and write, but also we have to build these institutions for our people. The two of them actually get involved in politics. So I think that when we're thinking about how are we telling this story, again, we started with our K-12 tour of like, how are we teaching children, students who aren't necessarily getting this in their curriculum at school about these histories of these really strong, very brave, very intellectual freedom seekers and freedom builders. And in that, thinking about what is literary activism, right? And how has it persisted and how has it continued throughout time? We actually had one of our first student tours, and on that tour, one of the chaperones was a grandfather who had come and chaperoned for his granddaughter. And as we're going through the tour and we're moving through the space, he's like, oh my gosh, like I'm a librarian. I've never been to this space, but I've never heard these stories before. And it was so empowering for him to be in that space with his granddaughter and just seeing the way that they were connecting on that tour, speaking particularly about Brenna Harvey, who really helped to create this new tour. And as I was explaining that situation, they were like, we need to think about this in a broader way. And I'm like, yes, right? Like, absolutely, right? Which is a thing that I had already been thinking about. But just having that particular instance where this man who, again, is there with his granddaughter, but also is Afro-Caribbean. And he's just like, these stories are so important and our children aren't learning these stories, right? Like my granddaughter wouldn't otherwise learn this story. And being able to come back to the shop after and us being like, okay, so here's Henson, here's Frederick Douglass, here's Harriet Jacobs, and him like getting the books, right? As well as the 1619 Project, their youth version of that, Born on the Water, which is what we start our Freedom and Agency tour with. We start with a couple of pages from that. It's not just that Black history starts with enslavement. These are folks who have families, who have legacies, right? Who have their own stories that they've been passed down, that they have been telling. And so it's like, why not do this, right? Like, why not think about Harriet Beecher Stowe, who created this thing that had impact, that really influenced, not always influencing people to action, but influenced people to start to think about the world around them in different ways. Why not start with her in this space as we're in this space with her, and then look to the people who influenced her? She has a book that is The Key to Uncle Tom's Cabin that includes these narratives. And so why not focus on them? Again, using her as a kind of a jumping off point, for lack of a better term, and then, reconceptualizing what does literary activism look like, especially when in certain traditions, everything isn't written down because intentionally and legally, folks weren't able to attain a certain level of education or even to learn to read and write at all, that a lot of those stories are originally being passed down orally. And so just building on that belief that literary activism is dynamic, it is important for us to look back at the roots of where these stories are coming from and to really highlight and recenter those Black voices that, again, influenced Harriet Beecher Stowe.
And I think that really speaks to what we're kind of getting towards with everything we're doing and moving towards at the Stowe Center. Understanding Harriet as she existed, because she didn't exist in a vacuum. So we're broadening the context and our understanding and the history of the places that she was living in by including these stories.
Getting community involved in local history as a form of civic engagement. And what that looks like, especially making like a longer series program like you have done with Garden of Literacy, which is starting an ongoing like spring and summer program.
This Saturday at the Stowe Center in Hartford, Connecticut.
How are you reframing local history to make people more engaged in these issues that still exist, that have existed since this work came out, and are shifting the landscape of what honestly America looks like now, what everybody's neighborhood, what the neighborhood around your center even looks like now?
Civic engagement is our future, and we need folks to stay involved. So Stowe moved to this part of Hartford, which was called Nook Farm, together with a whole bunch of other families who were all civically engaged. The Pulitzer Prize-winning biographer of Stowe, whose name is Joan Hedrick, said that in Nook Farm, there was no pot left unstirred. They were constantly talking with each other about what was going on in the world. They would meet each other on walks. They'd sit on each other's front porches, and they'd debate what was going on and what needed to change, in their opinion. I was telling this to one of our neighbors from the Asylum Hill Neighborhood Association, and she said, well, that's just like it is here now. And we agree, and we want to offer a space where that can continue.
So some of the ways we're doing that through programming is offering a few different opportunities for people to engage. We have a book club, of course, Harriet Beecher Stowe Center. We got to have a book club.
We have one too at any PM. It's what we fancy people love to do.
And we focus on social justice books. We have a Stowe Prize literary award every year, so we are looking at the short list. We're looking at what past winners are working on currently, just some really engaging and diverse books, too. Trying to expand what literary activism and social justice looks like by exploring different genres, speculative fiction, poetry, nonfiction, as well as fiction. We also have salons at Stowe. So these are more dialogue-based, but they take a few different forms. We've had some fantastic guest presenters, guest lecturers that have just really brought the latest scholarship to the Stowe Center and, to our audiences. And we also bring out collections pieces to really engage directly with history. We try and offer multiple ways to engage with these histories. Understanding that our present moment is very much tied to the past moments.
And continuing what Kat was talking about with tying the past to the present, we have a brand new program called Stowe on the Go, which is launching in June, which takes our salons type program and our tour program from the Stowe Center and brings it out to corporations, museums, other museums, schools, colleges, and has the opportunity to start a conversation using a historical object to get into the conversation about a topic from history and then segueing it into the modern day.
This Saturday, the Garden of Literacy Harriet Beecher Stowe Center Community Day. Games, activities, arts, crafts. You can learn about poetry and to become a better poet yourself. There's tours, there's workshops, there's giveaways, even an open mic. What a wonderful thing to focus on for the first not 413 oriented, just over the border with three people very connected to the 413.
And I think, Monty, I just want to say that we're the Connecticut River Valley, right? And so I think that when we're thinking about what's happening in the 413 and even thinking about that historically, like we have been connected by the Connecticut River. Even when you think about this period of enslavement, folks are moving between Springfield and Hartford and New Haven and Hadley and Northampton.
It's always
and
along
Amherst.
the river.
It's
always along the water.
river. And so we're here.
If only we were a
It's the
radio station
same-
called The River. We already did that.
Yes.
We can't go back. The past is past.
The past is past, and we can all learn from it.
We're always
And
building on it.
And we will learn from it at the Harriet Beecher Stowe Center in Hartford, right down the river. Executive Director Karen Fisk, the Director of Collections and Public Programs Kat White, and the newly appointed Director of Interpretation and Visitor Experience, friend of the show, Erica Slocum. Thank you all so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
Up next, we'll go way outside the 413 to the country code of 965.
That is Kuwait. And Kuwaiti author Buthaina Al-Essa has a new book that transcends borders and boundaries called The Book Censor's Library.
It was published in English by Restless Books, squarely situated in the 413 on Main Street in Amherst, concentrating on works in translation.
You're listening to the Fabulous 413 on 88.5 NEPM. Do you know Ilan Stabans from Restless Books, or?
No.
That's interesting.
I mean, they published my book.
He's great for this. I don't know if you know about what Restless Books does, but they have been trying to find great books that were not originally written in English and have them translated into English to try to broaden the horizons of English language readers.
That's amazing.
Yeah, my co-host Khalees and I have both read several books that they've published, so it's fun to read Cuban science fiction, things that we don't as U.S. Americans we don't have a lot of exposure to, and the fact that the publishing house is located really close to where we in our broadcast area is wonderful. So
I just need to say that English is a second language.
I think both of us have very little Arabic, so there you go.
No problem.
Alhamdulillah, right? That's
Alhamdulillah.
Alhamdulillah. Yeah. Restless Books in Amherst has published an incredible novel from best-selling Kuwaiti author Buthaina Al-Essa. The book is called The Book Censor's Library.
It was translated from the original Arabic by Reina Abdelrahman and Sawad Hussein. It addresses one of the most urgent topics facing democracies worldwide today, censorship. The book is reminiscent of and even references George Orwell's 1984 and Ray Bradbury's Fahrenheit 451. And I would throw in Lois Lowry's The Giver, but from a freshly female Arabic perspective.
Aside from being a writer, Buthaina Al-Essa runs a bookstore and publishing house in Kuwait called Takween. Up until about 4 years ago, all books printed in the country of Kuwait had to be approved by a committee on morality, which banned thousands of works, including 2 of Buthaina's previous titles. She joins us. Are you in Kuwait right now?
I am, yes. Hi. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for joining us. This book was incredible.
It really was.
I have to say, right off the bat, we have a meeting, to just go over the show really early, and the first words out of my mouth were, that book was so awesome.
Yeah, and my
my
wife saw how quickly I read it, which I'm not the fastest reader, but I went from 0 to page 261 in record time because it's just such a wonderful read. How do you describe this book, Buthaina?
Well, I guess the idea came after the birth of my bookstore, because it is located across the street with the Ministry of Information. So we keep having those visits. By officials checking that we are displaying the books they approved of. And I used to have many secret places to hide banned books that I will only display for readers because I don't like the word customers. Right. I trust. Right. So I always wondered, how do they do that? Because how can you read a book and fall in love with it and then keep doing that? So then a character was born. That is the book censor in the novel.
One of the things I thought was really interesting, and then I definitely want to ask you about opening a bookshop not that long after the larger, more restrictive portion of censorship ended, but none of the characters have specific names. Was that intentional, or just a way to make it broader for people to understand?
I think I felt more comfortable with not specifying time, location, names, culture, because on one hand, freedom of speech and censorship, these are universal issues. On the other hand, I was going to call some rabbits and have some guy like called Zorba dancing and and mix so many words. And many of the books that I played with are not originally in Arabic.
Yeah.
So it felt like, even, you read the English translation, but even if you if you read the Arabic version, you will feel that it is kind of translated because it's highly influenced by George Orwell, Alice in Wonderland, Zorba the Greek, and all these books. It just felt more comfortable for me to work on an area that is not under the pressure of any cultural or social influences.
Do those books, and I mean, Zorba the Greek is a major character, the book in the Book Censors Library, as is Alice in Wonderland, as are myriad white rabbits running around the censorship bureau. Were there references that would have only spoken specifically to a Kuwaiti or an Arabic-speaking audience that had to be translated to whatever your knowledge is of the English translation into something that an English reading audience would have more understanding of? Because I had wondered maybe Zorba the Greek isn't what it was really written about. Maybe they've put Zorba the Greek in here so we'll understand it. But that's not the case, I guess.
No, Zorba the Greek is very popular among Arabic readers.
Uh-huh.
It's an icon, and it's my first fight with the Ministry of Information
was because
of Zorba.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yes, and the thing about this character is that it can be very wicked and evil at some points, but very noble at the following points. It's really hard to classify Zorba, like good, bad. And that's exactly what is very confusing to the binary thinking of censors and how they censor books. It's like he keeps jumping around. He's a very naughty person. And I remember because Zorba confused the Ministry of Information here in Kuwait, because the first time I applied for the approval, I got it. I got the approval to display Zorba, sell Zorba, no problem. But after that, they changed their mind. They told me the book is banned. And I kept visiting their office with the paper that says it is approved.
Uh-huh.
And they kept printing more papers that it's not approved. So it was kind of personal. I felt like for me, on a personal level, it would make sense that it's the first chapter of the book has to be Zorba.
Especially because of things like that, how much of this book is based on your fight with the censorship boards in Kuwait?
I mean, I don't think I would ever write something like this if I wasn't already a publisher and a bookseller. It's highly influenced by my other personas, the bookseller, the publisher, not the novelist. And one time at the book fair, two girls approached who are working for the ministry. They do censor books. And they asked me for my other book that was banned a year ago, that is recently translated, called Lost in Mecca. And she said, I know I banned this book, but I want a copy. And I was like, what? You can't do that.
If you hear this conversation and then you read this book, it's going to make the book even more fascinating for you, I think.
Yeah, for sure.
Yes. She said, yeah, that's the ministry's copy. I want my own.
Uh-huh.
It was a very interesting case because she was able to fall in love with a book and want to own it. And also she has a book club where she discusses books. But her daytime job is to ban those books, the same books that she loves very much. I was already starting to write the novel, but I mean, the character made more sense after this incident.
It's a wonderful tale. It was recently published by Restless Books in Amherst, which takes books written in languages that are not English and translate them into English so that English-only readers have a broader experience of the literary world. And we're speaking with the best-selling Kuwaiti author, Buthaina Alesa, who wrote this book we're talking about, The Book Censors Library, just published a few days ago. Why were your earlier books banned by these book censors in Kuwait? What sort of material was in them that they found objectionable?
Well, that was a very different book. I mean, it was really social, political. It's about a kid that gets abducted during Hajj in Mecca. by organ trafficking organization. There is a lot of violence there, and it's a very dark book.
I can't wait to read it.
They thought it was inappropriate to have a kid kidnapped in Mecca, which is a sacred place. Surprisingly, the book wasn't banned in Saudi Arabia nor in Mecca. It is available there in every bookstore. But, you can't make sense of all their choices.
This book hasn't been censored in Kuwait yet.
No,
right.
It wasn't.
Which is kind of strange and surprising, I think, actually. But how does it feel to have your earlier work not available in the country, but this latest work, which is kind of critical of the system that banned the other two, is?
Yeah, well, I think part of it, of course, I was motivated by my anger, because Lost in Mecca was kind of a rebirth to me. This is, it was a very intensive experience of writing. It was brutal, and I was really proud of myself. I mean, I went out of the comfort zone, out of Kuwait, and explored areas and very sensitive topics. So I was pretty mad, but sometimes it feels like a compliment having your book banned.
We have there's a lot of authors where we live, and I know that many of their books have also been banned here, and they do wear it as a badge of honor. Now, when things get banned here in the U.S., they may pull it from a library in a school, or maybe even
specific states or specific towns will pull the book.
But there are very few consequences when a book is censored in this way, and it's more localized. It's not done by the government writ large. What happens to you as a writer if your book is banned, and as a bookseller if you are trying to sell these banned books? Hopefully nothing as drastic as happens in your book, The Book Censors Library. But what happens in Kuwait?
Well, it's bad, but not that. I mean, the writer only gets the book banned, but the bookseller needs to pay a fine or something. It's huge. I mean, it's approximately $10,000.
Wow. For selling a banned book.
Yes.
Whoa. That's incredible.
So it's risky, yes. It's risky. It's a challenge to have a bookstore here. I wouldn't recommend it.
Up next, reading as an act of rebellion and what it's like to have your bookstore inspected by the government when we continue our conversation with Bethena Alesa, author of The Book Censors Library.
You're listening to The Fabulous 413 on 88.5 NEPM.
The Fabulous 413 podcast is funded by Northeast Solar, homegrown in Hatfield, Massachusetts, and providing energy savings for their customers for over 10 years. Learn more at northeast-solar.com.
We're speaking with the Kuwaiti author and bookstore owner, Bethena Alesa, whose new book, published by Restless Books in Amherst, whose mission it is to take books written not in English and translate them into English, is called The Book Censors Library. What I love about the English language translation of this is you can almost substitute the word reader for trader.
Yeah.
And I think that is for both the good and the bad of it. If you're looking at it from the government who's censoring these books in the Book Censors Library, reader equals trader in their minds. You're not supposed to read. You're not supposed to interpret. But talk about the act of rebellion and defiance that reading is for you and for the community that you serve with your bookstore. Does it feel like an act of protest to be a reader?
It does. And we did many protests and many activities throughout the years. I mean, some people would just sit on the streets and read banned books just to send a message that it's pointless and it's stupid to censor books at a time like this, especially with the internet and everything. I do think that censorship is designed to make us more obedient and tame us in a way and make us less independent thinkers. And it does affect a society that plays by the rules. I mean, there are risks to being in 1984, absolutely. The point is, before the internet, when this was the norm, people would absorb such a culture and normalize it completely. But after the internet and the social media and everything, they still have this culture, have this mindset in them. They still believe that it's the duty and the responsibility of the state to guard their morality and the purity of their thoughts, like a bunch of immatures. And that's normal because they've been conditioned like this for decades. So I think we are transitioning now. People are starting to ask more questions and act against censorship.
I did want to ask about the illustrations in the book, because there's not many, but there are a handful, and they're really, I think, powerful. Where did they come from?
When I was writing the book, it was very visual in my head, despite the fact that it was built in a very abstract world. Not a specific country, not a specific historical era, no names, not a sign for the specifics of culture or anything, but it was very visual. I could see the metaphors pop out of the pages, and I loved it. I played with those images in my head all the time. And then I met the illustrator. He is a Kuwaiti artist. Now we are friends. We weren't friends then. And I said, I think your writing style goes very well with my book.
And like Khalid said, when those show up, it's surprising and haunting and perfect timing for the very few illustrations that do show up in there.
I think so too.
We've learned that Zorba the Greek and 1984 and these other books in English that are very popular here in the United States are also popular in Kuwait. Can you recommend a book as a book seller that we in the United States might not be as familiar with, but if we like these sort of post-apocalyptic 1984 speculative fiction type books that we might be able to find in English, maybe even through Restless Books in Amherst, that we should read?
Yeah, there is this German novel that I love very much. It's called Quality Land. But I have to check the name of the author because I don't want to make any mistakes.
Thorough like a librarian / bookstore owner.
Mark Ove Kling, Quality Land. It's amazing.
Excellent.
This is my recommendation, yes.
Thank you.
Anything in Arabic or from Kuwait, apart from your own other works that we should...
banned or no?
Yeah.
Well, I think the Arabic literature is really, really rich. It's really hard to recommend one book.
Have you had a chance to read the translation of the Book Censors Library?
No, and I'm still waiting for the book to arrive here in Kuwait.
Oh, no.
It did just publish a couple days ago.
That's true.
I keep seeing pictures on my on the social media, but I still didn't hold it yet.
It is very pretty.
Thank you.
And I hope you get yours. I put out a children's book at the end of last year. I still haven't gotten my copies. I'm sure that you will actually get yours.
Yeah, I can't wait.
One of the things that happens in the book is there's inspections of bookstores to make sure that what's being offered is the right things. And you mentioned that happens at your store. What is an inspection like?
They come with their little iPads and they check every title and they see if it appears banned or not banned, and they act accordingly.
What happens if they find like a bunch of if they find one title, you're going to get fined, but like if they find a bunch of titles, has that ever happened? Like where somebody's just had like a pile of banned books and was just flaunting it and got in and was used as an example or something like that? I feel like it might be quieter when those are taken care of, but
I mean, recently they went to court because they wanted me to pay the fine, the compensation for selling 2 books about the stateless in Kuwait. One is immigration studies, the other is literary criticism, really, but it's about the stateless, so it was politically sensitive. So I won the first case, I lost the second, and now we are still working on it. There is we are appealing, and let's hope it goes well. I mean, it's always easier to speak to a judge because ideally They're not biased to anyone. They hear both sides. It's easier to speak to a judge than to speak to a censorship official that is just stubborn and, I mean, they're not really talking.
A censorship official who secretly wants your books that they've already banned.
No, these are the good ones.
Oh, yeah. Right.
There's spectrum.
Well, let's hope you win your appeal, but
Yes,
if not,
for sure.
You could probably pick up the Book Censors Library through Restless Books and secretly help out the cause there.
That would be great.
How did the relationship with Restless Books come about? I was asking you earlier, you've not met Ilan Stabans, who's an Amherst College professor who runs the publishing company and the bookstore.
And who tipped us off to this title coming in when we talked to him about opening a bookshop for the publishing house. And this was a title that he mentioned to us, and we were like, oh, we absolutely want to read that and talk about that with the author if it's possible. So, yeah, just to corroborate, what has your relationship with Restless Books been like?
Well, I think I knew them first through Sawad Hussein, one of the translators of the book. I'm not really aware of any publishing houses outside. I checked their website. I thought it was really good. And I loved the name, like Restless Books.
Yeah.
I love naughty books. I think my book fits very well there.
I think so, too.
Yes. Those are always the fun ones, the ones they don't want you to read. If they don't want you to read it, there's probably a reason why you should be reading it.
Yes, and that is the one thing to keep in mind about most banned books.
Yes.
There is some danger there that you are a reader and a trader at the same time. And
Absolutely.
I think most of the time, that's probably where you want to be. Do you hear much about the censorship that happens of the books in the United States, in Kuwait? Like, have you heard
Not really.
Does it
No,
surprise you?
Yes, it does, very much.
It surprises me, too.
Not surprising so much that some of the same books that you mentioned are on a lot of those lists. The ones that Fahrenheit 451 has been banned, 1984 has been banned. Not so much Zorba the Greek, I don't think, but some of those other dystopian ones that encourage something that is discouraged in your book, interpretation. Both of the law and our practices. So I'm not necessarily surprised that this is a more universal thing, just like it's portrayed in your book.
That's astonishing. I'm kind of shocked.
We put on a good front about this whole freedom thing.
Yeah. Well, Khalees and I both love this book and devoured it and can't recommend it more highly.
Immediately lending it out to friends of mine, you got to read this now.
Thank you so much.
It's so good.
And it's available now through Restless Books in Amherst as we talk to the best-selling Kuwaiti author, Buthaina Alessa. And the Book Censors Library is the name of the novel. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much, Monte. Thank you, Khalees. It's a pleasure. Thank you very much.
I hope you enjoy the translation of your book as much as we did.
Yes.
I'm sure I will.
You have a note here that Indie Bookstore Day is the last Saturday of April.
Which
27th.
is not this Saturday, the Saturday after. So, yes, if you like independent bookstores, might be a good time to go check them out. There's a new one, Unnameable Books on Avenue A in Turner's. I love Restless Books in Amherst.
That's exciting.
There's the Montague Book Mill, which is one of my favorite places on earth.
If you're into counterculture, Massive Bookshop also out of Franklin County, which does a lot with organizing.
The Imaginary Bookshop in Greenfield, which has your book in its window display right now, Khalees.
Display. I signed some of those this past weekend at Meltdown. There are great, Odyssey, who've supplied us with authors, Book Moon in East Hampton. There's great places all around the four counties to go and get your books.
Or you can go to a big bookstore like Betsy, our engineer, did and moved your book to a more prominent location.
Did that happen?
Yes, Betsy just left us a note in our little script here. So,
I appreciate that. I appreciate that.
Well, here's more. All of the music during this Book Censors Library, by the way, have been banned songs.
Oh, really?
Songs that have been banned,
That's
including this
pretty
one.
great.
Yeah, Louie Louie and
this one.
Madonna.
This is a brass song.
Oh, yeah. What happened to my outro song there? Oh,
It's too
dang
late.
it.
We're hearing my band.
I'm trying to remember what it was that I put as our outro song. Anyway, this is soon to be banned. Khalees's band. Wednesday on the Fabulous 413, more poetry for National Poetry Month with former Poet Laureate of East Hampton, Alex Woolner.
They're also a part of Attack Bear Press, who have just exploded with poetic and literary events all around the 413 lately, including an open mic night and a festival happening next weekend.
And we'll get on our bikes for environmental justice with the Solar Rollers, who are getting ready for a ride from Greenfield to Northfield to bring attention to the Northfield pumping station.
Maybe they would also want to be part of the Cancers. The Cancers are the counterculture group that happened in the Book Censors Library. We loved this book.
It was a great book.
It was really great.
I'm Monty Belmonte.
I'm Khalees Smith. Thanks to the Fabulous 413 Tech Team. We will talk to you tomorrow.